Today's guest is Jack LaFountain. He's an author and he's a Vietnam veteran. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct. Yeah.
And let's talk about what you have going on. Let's talk about what your latest project is.
Right now, the project I'm working on a collection of 4 short stories. I'm going to be at Readers Conference in Deadwood, South Dakota in June. So I'm writing a collection of short stories called Dead Man's Hand. It's, the 4 stories for the aces and eights, and then a wild card story to go with it. But um, that's kind of where I'm at right now. Just finished another Western project and finished the 4th book in my people call it Moon series. I call it my Ed Landry series, but uh, all the titles end with Moon, so it's kind of been dubbed the Moon series.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when I read your bio, what kind of interested me is you kind of described yourself as like Twilight Zone influence or Twilight Zone similarities. Is that a show that you take some inspiration from? Is that would you say that you have more of that kind of like that twist ending in a lot of Twilight Zones?
I do try for that. Probably watched all the Twilight Zone episodes a couple of times at least. The Outer Limits,
Oh,
One
that's a great
Step
show. Outer
Beyond,
Limits, yeah.
yeah, One Step Beyond, Alfred Hitchcock, all of those. But yeah, I probably my biggest influence. I kind of grew up on all the Universal monsters,
Right.
Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, the Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon. Uh, but I guess probably more than anything, I've got 6 books, all with werewolves in it. I guess I love werewolves. You know.
So what is your inspiration more that kind of like now it'd be more of the old school horror because a lot of the modern horror is just like this is be as gory as humanly possible. So is it
Yeah,
more like the creatures and the plot twists and so on, like the sort of like Dr. Frankenstein, the old school werewolf, the old school mummy, that sort of thing?
it is. I actually had one review on Amazon, and they said if you're looking for the sparkling vampires and those kind of werewolves from the like Twilight kind of thing, said this is not the book for you. He doesn't do that. It's old. It is old school werewolves, and then a lot of my stories too. I tell people sometimes, Bayou Moon was the first one that I wrote, and it's set in Louisiana, so the werewolf's called a rougarou there. And
Okay, what's it called?
is it called a rougarou?
Okay, is that a local term for it?
It is. It's a Cajun derivative. In French, it's loup-garou
Okay.
is werewolf. The Cajuns kind of mix some Cree Indian in with their terminology before they moved to Louisiana, and it came out rougarou.
Okay.
So, and I tell people, yeah, the story has got a rougarou, a werewolf in it, but it's not about the werewolf. It's about the sheriff in the book who is trying to figure out who the rougarou is and how to stop him from killing everybody in town, and he has to make a decision between doing what he thinks is the right thing to do versus what his legal responsibility is. What's legal versus what's right,
Right.
and he has to make that choice when he finds out who the rougarou is.
No, that's kind of an interesting twist. One thing it instantly reminded me of is No Country for Old Men, where the story is actually about the sheriff and the way that law enforcement has changed over time. Is not actually about like the violent scenario that's going on. Like
Right.
I think it's kind of cool when people take that like it's a dramatic. It has violence, it's a dramatic twist, but it's not like straight up gore, like over the top gore. Is that
Right.
kind of more what you go for? Like a lot of stuff is like it'll almost be like the story's running along one way, and then all of a sudden extreme gore in your face.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of extreme gore. I've actually very little. One of the samples from my latest book in that series was the fellow that narrated the audiobook. He read a portion from his podcast, and one of the people that wrote in and commented said they just came in and sat down to dinner, and he read this, this scene from it where the werewolf attacks this guy, and his bowel and bladder let go, and he said, "Yeah, I didn't need that at dinner time." I wrote back and told him I apologize for that, but I'm a nurse and nothing would stop me from eating.
Right.
You could tell me any.
Well,
I
some
did.
people are offended over anything,
Yeah.
like whatever their pet project is or their pet peeve is. If it touches that button, they're offended. Um,
Yeah.
do you have like limitations, like stuff that you definitely do not include? Like, some people try to limit curse words as little as possible, or they try to limit, animal abuse or whatever. Do you have things that you like kind of draw the line at?
Uh, Very little. I don't use a lot of cussing in there. No, they're probably in all my books. You might find uh maybe an F-bomb twice.
Mhm.
I don't use a lot. I do use some, but very little of that. But that's kind of basically about the only thing. Uh, and the reason I do that probably more than even sometimes more than I think I should. I thought maybe this word needs to be here, and then no, because I want to try and reach a bit of a younger audience sometimes with some of the books, because they do have a message besides the horror, and that seems to have worked out well. I had one school librarian, said put my collection of short stories in the high school library, and said, the review, that yeah, kids can read this. There's, it's not filled with a lot of words you don't.
Expletives and so on,
Yeah,
something
not a lot of
dramatically
that in there.
offensive.
But I do use a lot. I do occasionally get and not a complaint, but just a comment from people who read the book as like, "Why did you kill the dog off? Why did the horse have to die?"
Right.
Yeah, I did get that, and so I there's no torture in it. I watched a show on the True West one time, and one of the people that wrote in said, when they're robbing a stagecoach, why don't they just shoot the horses?
Right.
And the answer was, well, they did, but we don't show that on
Oh, did
TV.
they really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I said, yeah, they did do that. In the actual Wild West, they did just shoot the horses. The stagecoach can't go anywhere, but it's we don't show that on TV because people don't want to see the horses
That'd be
get
considered
shot.
too offensive or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. So, yeah, in mine, I do have the opening scene of Bayou Moon, and this I kind of got from my own experience. uh Fellas got he gets up in the morning and his little dog just goes nuts when he heads for the door. Not that it doesn't want him to leave, but there's something out there on the other side of the door. Don't open the door.
Right.
And he opens the door, and of course it's the Rougarou, and he dies. And when I first read this to a group of authors, they said, well, their big question was, what happened to the dog? So as I was writing on the book, of course, a couple chapters later, the sheriff finds the dog dead. But it doesn't really. There's you don't see the dog dying. He just finds the dog dead, and so yeah, that
Right.
happens. And not everybody's all, I guess, is always happy with that. But like I said, I've never got any negative comments about it. Just
Yeah, I kind of like it, and it seems like it's more respected when it's kind of that old school feel of like it like builds up the story and you have like more one horrific moment as opposed to interspersed like tons of gore, tons of like shock,
yeah.
value. Like it seems that holds up way better. Is that more what inspires you? Like trying to construct the story like that?
Yeah, I do. When I construct a story, I'd like for the ending to kind of be unexpected in a way. I in Bayou Moon, I wrote it, and I had different people commented, and one person said I knew who the Rougarou was right away, and I
Right,
had other people say I got all the way to the end and still hadn't figured out who it was. Uh, and I didn't consciously try to hide it, but then again, I didn't consciously try to open it up.
right.
Uh, Lovecraft says to hide your monster as long as possible, uh,
And I'm
which
a big Lovecraft fan, so that that's definitely somebody to go with.
yeah, I read one of his books on writing, and that was one of his tips: is you hide your monster as long as possible in the story. Um, and so a lot of them, some of them I do try to do that more than others, or misdirect in trying to try to point out that maybe this person is the monster when they're not really.
Right.
Uh, and but leave enough that that that's not really them.
That's also kind of more of an old school take, which I actually like. That but like I say old school, but like classic horror, like Frankenstein's monster or
Right.
Dracula or something, where like you slowly build up the tension, but it's not straight up gore, and you might know what's going on, you might not know what's going on, but it's not like everything has to be explained to you. It seems
Right.
like some modern stuff like they want to explain everything and they go so far explaining it that it becomes less realistic.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I like to, I like when they get done with the story to, that they know what happened. Um, I did have one fellow comment that I didn't have enough backstory in mind, and my idea with that is, backstory's fine as long as it happens in the course of the action,
Right,
and do not try to explain it all to start with, because writing starts in the middle of things. You
right.
know, you drop into the middle of the whatever's going on, and hopefully, you get a little sense of the characters and who they are and what they've been through as the story goes along, without necessarily explaining that, but trying to give people a clear picture of it. Um, and I think that's one thing that I've been able to do, uh, because I finished three in this Moon series, and I got tons of comments about the sheriff in the story. His name's Ed Landry, and I got tons of comments about you need to do something about Ed's love life. He never gets the girl. She gets killed, or he's got a terrible love life. So I wrote the one I just finished in that series is called Lover's Moon, and he actually gets the girl. So people get I tell people all the time, I sit down to write. I like tell my friends that, well, I'm off to Louisiana going to visit Ed, and he knows right away I'm off in my own world, there. And to me, my so many of my characters are real people, and um, when I write, I'm very much a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I
Okay.
may have I have an
I've never heard that
idea.
term before. Yeah.
Yeah, I may have an idea about how I want to start the book. Um, Bayou Moon. Basically, I just had that first chapter. Like I said, with the dog warns him there's something on the other side of the door.
Right.
That's all I had when I started writing, or started into writing the book. And I tell people I try to let the characters tell me what's going to happen next.
So
Uh,
do you not take notes beforehand? Like, do you have just a very rough idea? What's your process?
hardly ever. I you know I hear a lot of writers say that they don't know where they get their ideas. I think I know where every idea for every book came from. Uh, in a way, sometimes, like for example, the Ed Landry with the dog warning him there's something on the other side of the door. That's just something from life. I mean, the dog runs to the door and barks, and just the way my mind works is, what if it's something bad out there?
Right.
What if there really is something bad? And try to take it from there. I got one story, and the book hasn't been published yet, but it's pretty much written. That I got the idea for the story. Somebody showed me a picture of this woman, and she's wearing like Red Riding Hood. She's got a cowl and a cape on, but her back's to you, and she's standing. You can tell she's standing on a cliff. And they said, "What do you get from this picture?" Okay, normally being a guy, I would just say, "Well, that's just a woman standing there." But the author part, the writer part says, what is she thinking? What is she up to? And I got the idea, they asked me, well, what is she thinking? What's going to happen? And I said, she's going to jump. And I took that idea, rather than have her jump from the cliff, I had her, it was sort of a Gothic, dark Gothic, kind of the old classic Gothic, 1800s. She marries a guy that she goes to this castle, terrible things happen, and she ends up jumping from the castle window. And actually, the story starts. She's already jumped, and she's a ghost.
Yeah, that's called a twist.
But the fellow that actually drove her to it, who is sort of the bad guy of the story, I got his whole thing from another song that the Guess Who did. It's called "No Sugar Tonight," and there are a couple of lines from that. One says, "Sudden darkness, and I can see. Another that I've fallen from her skies." And so the idea for the book originally was she's jumped, she's a ghost. He's now died. He's a ghost, but he's decided he actually loves her, and he's trying to find her in the castle to make things right.
Okay. What's this called? This is a story that you have had now?
I've written it. I haven't. It hasn't been published yet.
Okay.
I'm hoping for this year, but it's called Lady on the Edge. But I hope maybe later this year to get it done. I've hesitated so long because that book is so unlike the stuff that you write, because it doesn't have so much cussing in it, but it does have sex and violence, that kind of thing. And it said, that's not your usual. In fact, I even one person said, maybe you should do a pen name for that, because it's just, it's not your normal thing. But I haven't decided about that. Probably not. Probably own up to it.
Well, one thing that I've done, like I do a lot of book covers, as well as writing. And, I remember I did a cover for a Piers Anthony story, and Piers Anthony is known for a lot of his more like young adult type stuff. But he did one, it's called The Silpass. It's like about girl slaves and like a different planet, like very, very not what he normally does. But he used a different publisher, but he used his name.
Yeah. So well, I'm kind of prejudiced there because I'm partner in the publishing company.
Okay.
I own part of the publishing company, so I'll go with our company. But eventually I'll do it. I also did a fantasy novel that again I hope will be out this year. They originally those stories were originally with another publisher, and they were just taking forever. And I actually found out they really weren't working on them. They kind of worked when they want to, and when they didn't want to, they didn't work on it. And I'm like, I'm moving it to get it done, get them out there.
Publishing companies are very much a mixed bag in my experience. Like
They are, yeah.
you go through one, you go through another. They promise this, and it can be very trying.
Yeah, working on the publishing side, I get that. I get a lot of authors that they submit to us, and we like what they did, and they said, "Well, how much is it going to cost me to publish with you?" Oh no, well, we don't charge
vanity publisher. Yeah,
I said anybody that wants you to pay them to publish your book, run.
right.
We're small, but we're traditional publishers. We don't charge people. We pay royalties.
Right.
That's how if you sell books, we make money, you make money. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
Hopefully we make enough to cover our costs. We do a lot of first time authors, and my books kind of cover the cost to start with, and then
So do you think that you put more into the publishing company than it makes back? Like it does it constantly say like right slightly in the red, or is it pretty much like a self-supporting entity at this point?
It's pretty much self-supporting. Where this is 2023 will be our third year,
Okay.
and we made a profit last year, and
Okay.
we paid people besides our authors' royalties. We paid other people, and so we very happy with what we're going. Like I said, we're not big. We only published 12 books last year. We did basically one a month.
Okay.
Uh, and we'll probably do that this year, maybe more, depending on how many of mine we can get out of mothballs and do. But I do editing for the publishing company. So
And why don't you tell everyone what your publishing company is?
it's called House of Honor Books,
Okay.
and yeah, our website is just houseofhonorbooks.com. We're online. Our catalog's on there. Uh, we are branching out. We have, I think, 4 new authors for this year right now in the works. We've got about a half a dozen novels. We just put out one. I think it made it December 30th or 31st. It just made the 2022.
Okay.
That was written by a fellow from Yorkshire, England, and it's a fantasy kind of thing, and it's very good. Doing well too with it. So
What do you
always,
find does the best sales wise, like paperbacks or Kindle or audiobooks?
uh, we kind of take spells. And it's kind of strange to me because when the first book I published, I was going to just do the Kindle, just the ebook, and I got back right away. I want a paperback. I said, okay, we'll do paperbacks too. So we started doing the Kindle and the paperback, and I sell more Kindle books. I still sell more ebooks than the paperbacks, but yeah, that's kind of took me by surprise. But we also make money from Kindle has a thing called Kindle Unlimited.
Right.
It's kind of scary in a way.
Don't they you don't make money off that? Isn't it like you just
You
for exposure pretty much?
actually you do make money, and that's the kind of scary part of it.
Okay.
Is you check out a book from Kindle Unlimited, you check out one of my books, and you start reading it. We're paid for every page you read.
Wow. Okay.
Now, how do they know how many pages you just read? I like I when I first heard that, I thought, how in the world do they know how many pages that somebody read? But they do. You can read one page, and it shows up on uh, our information that we get from Kindle. Somebody read one page of Krampus Knocks last night. It's like, okay, but we do get paid for each page that's read. So we enroll in that and keep our books in that. And I get a lot of page reads, so I guess a lot of my readers have Kindle Unlimited because they seem to use it a lot.
How have audiobooks done for you? Like the first audiobook that I did was, my newest book, and I had no idea, so I did a percentage. Like the narrator gets a percentage, I get a percentage. If I'd
Right.
known how well it sells, I would have just paid them outright because that blows away everything else.
Hmm. Yeah, we're doing audiobooks. We started the very first one we did was in January of 21. And I wasn't going to do audiobooks. I thought, too expensive for starting out. Anyways, it's too expensive to do audiobooks. And I actually had a fellow that he does a podcast, and he read a chapter of the book on his podcast. And we sold some books from that. But about 6 months later, he called me up and said, you want to turn this book into an audiobook? I said, I'd love to, but I can't afford to do that. you know, it would just don't justify the cost. He said, well, look, Amazon's come out with a new thing that I can do your audiobook. I can narrate your audiobook and we split the profits. That you don't have to pay a thing. I said, well, okay, I'm in. Uh, and we do very well with the audiobooks. Surprising. Well, it's kind of hit and miss. It depends on a lot on the narration, and again how much the narrator promotes it as well. But
Right.
we do all the promotion of it that we can. But some sell better than others. The werewolf ones sell very well.
I remember with the audiobooks, they had a couple different narrators to give you like a little bit of a snippet of their speech. So you go, this is the one I like the best to read. Mine. Um, is that what you get? You get like a couple different people auditioning to you, or it was one guy?
Uh, we generally put the books up for audition. We have some people that we use, and uh, we just know that this particular book is going to fit them, uh, and we'll offer it to them first. You want to do this book? If not, we're going to put it up for auditions. Or we have told people that, okay, we'd like you to do this book. We put it up for auditions. Audition for it, and usually works out well. But, yeah.
Yeah, I've some people have like nightmare stories about like they'll narrate their own book and people are like, yeah, it's a great book, but I cannot stand your methodology of speech, or like you made the book sound more flat and like less interesting just by you narrating it. Like authors will insist on narrating their own books.
Yeah. We did have one author that wanted to narrate his own book, and I was hesitant at first, and I said, go for it. You know, well, of course, we had him audition with everybody else, and he did do a good job with it. Um, but we actually lucked out last year. We had a fellow who is a stage actor, that kind of COVID kind of knocked him out of business for a bit. Nobody was going to the theater. He wasn't, it's kind of hard to get work. So he started doing audiobooks, and he has amazing voice. He does amazing voices. So
Okay.
we had him do a couple of books for us that are collections of short stories to get all the different kind of voices in there. Um, and he just did a great job with that.
Is he always one of your go-to guys?
Um, Yeah, we use him, and like I said, he's is outstanding for the collections of stories, especially, and I think he likes that better. The little short story where he can really get into it and do the acting part rather than the novels. I don't think, yeah, he's not done a full length novel for us, but he's done a couple of collections.
Okay.
So
So moving on, what about book trailers? Have you tried those at all?
have not yet. We haven't done that yet. Probably something in the future for us, but we're like I said, we've gotten to where we're making a profit, so we kind of expand a bit. But
But I've heard very mixed things. Like I make book trailers for my stuff. I just personally like it, but
mhm.
it's like I've heard mixed stuff about it brings in sales, it doesn't bring in sales, nobody really watches it. So, I tend to ask people to see what their experience was, but nobody seems to say definitely one thing or another.
Yeah, I've watched a few and kind of mixed about it, but then again, uh, I've watched like the first 5 or 10 minutes of I don't know how many horror movies, but that's all of it I watched. It's like, yeah, if the story lets me down right away, I'm out of there. So, but trailers seem, they're short snippets and they hold your attention. So I think it would be a positive thing.
Yeah, it seems like people have like an increasingly short attention span. Although there's a number of things that like Lock and Key came out as like a Netflix series, Like now, I think there are 3 episodes or 3 seasons in, but like it like a book, like a lot of the old school books, especially, it takes a little while to develop. So if you quit right away, you're not going to see the series.
Right. Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
again, if you go through 3 episodes and they're all crap, you just wasted 3 hours of your time.
Yeah. I don't watch a lot of TV, so or even movies, but I have watched a few series that I enjoyed, but they occasionally I'll find one that I like.
What have you watched that you enjoyed?
Um, there was one called Vikings that I watched a lot of that one.
Right?
And then well, I think the name of it was Salem. I don't might have been.
Okay.
It was about Salem and witchcraft and yeah, well, I think I watched that entire one. And I think The Mandalorian is probably the only other one I've watched. But
Yeah, Mandalorian is great. I mean, there
yeah,
are a few that I would recommend, but Mandalorian is definitely one of the top ones. So let's switch to you. Like, talk less about the publishing company and more about you. What
okay.
got you into doing this? Because it seems like you've had a varied career.
Yeah, I've done a lot of things. Um, I'm not one of the people that will say, I always wrote, things. I didn't, I didn't write things very often, uh, but I was a storyteller. I would get up in front of people and tell stories. I didn't write them, but I would just make stuff up as I went along, uh, kind of entertain friends. I did do a little writing. Of course, had the everybody's high school English teacher that said, "Oh, yeah, you got a possibility here." And yeah, maybe. I just never had any interest in it. I actually got interested in writing, at least writing things I wanted people to read or was willing to show people that I'd written something. Uh, I was actually in college. It was 1984, I guess. I wrote in our composition class in college. We had an assignment to write a story about the most interesting place we ever ate. And I was just a few years removed from coming back from Southeast Asia. And so I wrote a story about a place on Okinawa called Taco Charlie's. And the grade I got was see me. So I went and saw the professor, and he said, good story. But you missed the whole thing because it was supposed to be about a real place. And I told him, honest to God, with my hands up, that's a real place. He said, really? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he said, well, part of the grade, he said, your writing style sounds like a lot like a fellow called Gene Shepherd, who wrote a book called In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash.
Uh,
And so I thought, okay, I'm going to get that book and read it and, see if it's any good. But before I could buy the book, it was Christmas time, and I'd watching all the Christmas specials, and I don't know if it was the first year that it came out, maybe not, but I turned on a movie called Christmas Story, Ralphie and his bunch, and as I was watching the credits, it says based on a story written by Gene Shepherd. All other, in God we trust, all others pay cash. And I thought, wow, I didn't think, I love the story. I thought, if I could tell a story that sounded, kind of went along that lines, maybe I should give it a try. And so I did sit down. I took some college courses in writing. Just basically at that time, of course, that was pretty much before computers. I took a correspondence course from, I think, the University of Connecticut, and where you actually wrote the stories, you mailed them in to the instructor. They actually wrote out whatever they thought, and editing and sent it back to you. And other than that, and I, again, encourage that. Yeah, these stories could be published in magazines if if you send them out there. And I did get one on a horror e-zine when they first came out. But I'd started writing a book that I'd written a short story about what if during the Civil War both sides created werewolves as weapons of terror. And it was just a little short story, which
Right.
eventually got published. But then I thought, when I sat down, actually, the first book I decided to write, I was based on that short story, and I thought, the story will be okay. That actually happened, and this soldier, he saw that happen. He wasn't supposed to see these werewolves, but he did see them. And actually, the lieutenant in charge of the werewolves saved him from a werewolf, and he left Virginia after the surrender and was headed for Texas. He wanted to get as far west as he could get. He actually hadn't planned to stop in Texas. We were going to go on to California, but he ended up stopping in Texas, and the werewolf showed up there. One of these escaped when the Confederacy or Lee's army fell apart outside of Appomattox. These guys who were werewolves, they're supposed to be fighting. They escaped everywhere. Now the government was trying to clean it up, and one showed up where he lived in Texas, and that became a book called "Death Rides the Red River." And
Did
it's
you mix a little bit of military history in there? Like that's
Yeah,
actually
I
what
did.
my dad's retired now, but that's what he taught for a while was military history.
I did. There is a bit about there's some descriptions of Gettysburg. There's descriptions of the surrender, um, and then of course later when he's in Texas, and talk about Reconstruction Texas, and a lot of some historical setting to it.
Okay, so when you were in the Vietnam War, and did that affect the way that you look at stuff? Did that how did that go about? Like, how did that transition to your writing career, if it did at all?
Uh, I've got some attitude I think that I developed there. I wasn't actually in Vietnam. I was in the Philippines. I was the Air Force and we were flying supplies into uh and uh flying those big aluminum boxes out. Where I had a lot of those, but get a plane full of those casket boxes. Uh So yeah, it did a bit. I don't know. Some people say, I still got a chip on my shoulder about, the way GIs were treated then. And I'll admit to that. I do. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. But I think it has colored uh, a bit and I don't know if it's just me or maybe it's from that experience, but a lot of my protagonists and stories have a strong sense of duty. I've got to do my duty no matter what happens.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think so. I think it did impact that.
Were you in there? Were you in the military just for the war? Were you going to make a career out of it? What happened?
My intention was to make a career out of it, but I had I got talked out of it. I got married, got talked out of it, and actually became an ordained minister for a number of years after that, and a hospice chaplain. I gave that up. People ask, why did you give up doing that? And I still actually am ordained. I don't pastor a church, or I teach classes now and then, but I told them starvation. I you hear a lot about these guys that preach that make millions of dollars, but that's the rarity. That's that's not the common. Uh, I had a family to feed. I'd been working as a hospice chaplain and working with nurses, and I saw what they were doing, and I thought I can do that. I'd love to do that too. I'd love to do what they're doing plus what I'm doing. And so I went back to school, became a registered nurse. I did that for about 25 years. Might still be doing it, except I had to have back surgery and that kind of ended things. But I look at that as a positive thing because that's what started me writing full time. I
Okay.
did write my first book and first collection of short stories on lunch breaks in the minutes when nothing was going on. I had it at the nurse's station writing in the composition books, and I worked night shifts, so I'd stay up late at night on the nights I didn't work and write on it. But yeah, when I retired in 2019 and started writing full time after that. So yeah, I look on it as a good thing.
You look on the transition, or you look on the backstory, like your history, like everything that you've been through that helps to build up like the content of what you can write about.
It does. It creeps um, into my characters, more the protagonists, or the kind of the good guys in the story. Uh, a lot of that background creep comes in there. I've actually written um, three westerns that are Christian based stories. Um, and sometimes I don't say that because I've had people read them and say this is not really Christian based literature. There's really no preaching in here. It's just a story about people who happen to be. The series is based on a fellow that was getting after the Civil War, sort of Jesse James style, began robbing banks in the border states and in the North, and uh, then has some experiences. He kills a guy and converts to Christianity, becomes a frontier preacher, basically hiding out in the church. I mean, not that he, not, I mean, not he's hiding out in the sense that he hasn't told anybody about his past life. He's not really hiding from the law or anything. He figures the law is not even after him, that nobody knows but him. Uh, and becomes a frontier preacher. But then, just as things seem to be going well for him, his old gang rides into town, and his cover's blown, and he has to face up to the things he did. And he goes on through the series. He actually goes back and stands trial for murder. The the one I just finished, he returns to the town after his murder trial. Which
And
and
what's
I
the
and
series called?
what's that?
The series, what's it called?
It's called Man of God series. There are three of them. Uh, I write them, and I'm going to write a fourth one in November. There's a thing called National Novel Writing Month, and it's sort of a personal challenge. The challenge is to write a 50,000 word novel in the 30 days of November. And these books are books that I wrote during National Novel Writing Month. Uh, and I'll probably do another one next November, or this coming November, which I didn't intend to do. I intended to write the one book in the series, the original book. I kind of thought, that's it. That's all I'm going to do on it. And then I got talked into, you got to write the sequel, about the trial and all that. So okay, I wrote it. And I said, I'm done with, I'm not going to write any more of these. And then just, oh hell no, you created a whole town full of people, and you've got all there's all kinds of stories to tell, and it's set in the 1870s in Wyoming. So And there are, there's some historical fiction to it as well.
Okay, do you find that do you find that 'cause it's kind of strange that it seems like you have strong religious beliefs but you do horror. You
Yeah,
know, do people like bring that up? Is that a conflict for you?
the people bring it up. It's not a conflict for me. Um, and my response to it generally is, yes, I write horror, but when you boil down my horror stories, it's a battle of good versus evil. Um,
Well, a lot of old school horror is
yeah,
morality
yeah,
play.
yeah, old school horror. That's kind of the way it works. You something terrible happens. In the case of there's suddenly a Rougarou in town, and the good guys have to battle it, and hopefully, and I think I guess I don't have anywhere and I don't have anywhere the bad guys win, so I guess I'm consistent with that. At least but usually the good guys pay a price for being the good guy too.
Well, it seems like also a number of them are flawed. Like they're flawed people. Like they
Yeah,
bank robbers. They killed people, but now they're doing something where I guess they're trying to you know they're trying to make up for their crimes.
it is. In my book Bayou Moon, like I said, it's a conflict with the sheriff between doing what's right and doing what's legal, and I'll give away a bit at the end. Uh, but in the Rougarou mythology, uh, you can become a Rougarou if somebody puts a curse on you. They can curse you with being a Rougarou, uh, and that's what's happened in this story. But the fellow that and again, this is a little bit different in this story. You see the story like the Wolf Man, either one, the original or the remake that was done 2010. Uh, the character, for the most part, in the Wolf Man, he doesn't want to be a werewolf.
Right. I
Uh,
like both of them, by the way.
yeah,
I'd a
actually,
lot of people didn't like the new version. It's a little slow. I liked it.
I did. I like the new one. Of course, Anthony Hopkins in that, and his role in it, he comes to like being the werewolf. But in my story, Bayou Moon, the guy that has the curse put on him does it on purpose. He wants to become Rougarou because he wants to take revenge on people that did him wrong. Because he finds out that he's dying, and he wants to take revenge on people before he dies. So he gets a curse put on him, and the sheriff figures this out. And when he's killed, or he actually dies. He gets in a battle with another Rougarou, and they basically kill each other. Or well, one is killed, the other one the sheriff shoots and kills. But the the main antagonist, he dies of his cancer in jail. They've locked him up because they found out he's the Rougarou, he's the murderer. They've locked him up, and he dies. And the problem the sheriff has is whoever put the curse on him is out there, and they could do it again. And so one of the conflicts is, what am I going to do about that? And his his decision is, he finds out who it is, he knocks on the door, and when they answer, he kills them.
Okay,
And
well, hopefully you didn't give the whole thing away so somebody could
well, then,
still find
yeah,
interest in
like I
it.
said, I give away a bit at the end of that one. But um, yeah, so he's the sheriff, he's the good guy, but he kills somebody on intentionally. It's murder one. He plans to do it. He makes arrangements for basically for his life, and then he kills somebody. Uh, people are like that, you know. So, and sometimes, and maybe that's a, you know, a bit of a military background, is sometimes it's your duty to do
Well,
that.
it's the lesser of two evils.
Yeah,
Is
right.
you know, it's kind of that story reminds me a little bit. It's not the same at all, but it reminds me a little bit of Pumpkinhead. Have you seen the movie Pumpkinhead?
Yes. Hmm.
Where a guy, like, first he wants to get revenge for his son, and then he regrets it later on.
Right.
Is that was that sort of your thinking in this? Like, this is what he wants to do, and he regrets it, or he doesn't have any regrets whatsoever?
Oh, for the sheriff,
Yeah.
for the
No,
Rougarou.
for the person who becomes the Rougarou, the
Oh,
werewolf.
he he doesn't really regret it, but he does kind of lead the sheriff on to figure out that it's him, basically. So once he kills the people that he wants revenge against, he'll be stopped.
Okay.
So he, you know, he's willing to be the Rougarou, but he's willing to, once he accomplishes what he wants to do, to quit being, you know, to not be the Rougarou.
Is that even possible?
It is actually. There's some lines of thought on that are that if you're made a Rougarou by the curse, or even sometimes if you're the last victim of a Rougarou, you only become a Rougarou for 101 days.
Okay. Is it a little bit different mythology than the, like, you need a blood transfusion or a bite from another werewolf?
That can do it. You know, if you are, but kind of in the Rougarou, I think it's if you're the last victim, you know, they're only going to be a Rougarou for a certain period of time for the most part, because they don't want to be a Rougarou. They got a curse put on them, or there is a religious tie. They're part of, and again, it's part of the Cajun culture. You can become a Rougarou if you break Lent 7 years in a row.
Okay.
That you can become a Rougarou, and you're a Rougarou for 101 days. Uh, and people who are the last victim of the Rougarou then become a Rougarou.
Right.
So it is sort of self-perpetuating. But
Like, it builds up into something else.
yeah,
Okay. So would you say, do you have a specific focus on what you do right now? Like, do you try and do more horror? Do you try and do, more like old western, or do you like wherever leads you, wherever you feel inspired by at the moment?
yeah, it's kind of whatever hits me at the moment. I was writing a blog actually day before yesterday. Like I said, I'm working on this book that I'm going to take to Deadwood with me, and that is Western short stories. And you know, suddenly I got the idea for the next book in the Ed Landry Moon series. And so, you know, and I thought, and I tell a lot of people that write with us, like, okay, you got to ignore that, you know, and go on with what, you know, finish what you're doing, because that's always a distraction. It seems to me anyway, it's always a distraction. I get into writing a book and I get another idea, and you want to run off to that, because for me, writing, the starting and the finishing of writing come pretty fast, and are sort of enjoyable. You know, you get this idea, oh, I want to write this, and you start writing it, and as what happens with me, then you get to the middle of the book, and this is something that, you know, writing instructors say this happens with pantsers, that they get to the middle of the book and they get bogged down, and that does happen, and it becomes, actually, I tell people it becomes work. I've
Right.
got to work to get through this part of it. You know, I've got to work to hear what the characters, you know, what are they trying to tell me now, so we can kind of get to the end. And you know, once I get through that middle part, and then I know what the end is. And again, it's like at the beginning, if you write in a rush, and you know, you're really supercharged about doing that, and you charge into it. And uh, yeah, that I you know, that middle part is work, and it's usually when you're in the work part and you're really, you're really bogged down, you're kind of struggling with it, that you get an idea, a new idea, and that gets you charged up. I want to go charging after that. And I told him, you can't do that. But the other night, like I said, I was working on this story, and I'm almost through this book, and I got this idea for the next Rougarou book, and I said, okay. I sat down and I wrote about, I don't know, 500 words, and then I said, okay, I've got to stop here. I can't do any more. I'll finish the book I'm working on, then I'll go back and do that do that one. Because I tell people, if you have a really good idea that you're going to be able to write, you really can't forget it. I had one idea for a story, and it was one of the first ideas I ever had, I think, before I was just started writing. I just had this kind of vision of this different kind of creature going from a tropical rainforest heading towards this sort of mystical city, big gold dome, and there's all these big buildings and all this, and that's all I had. And I think I sat down to try and write it once, and no good. I don't know what comes after that. And it was years later, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years later, my grandson decided Grandpa writes, I'm going to try and write something. So he wrote this little 1-page story for school, and he brought it home and he put it on my desk. And I read through the story. I said, that's this book. This little sort of vision I had in my mind about what I wanted to do with the story, or didn't have a story for. Suddenly I had a story for it. So, I tell you, a lot of those things, if you've really got something, don't go away. They just kind of hang on. At least that's the way it's worked out for me.
How old's your grandson?
He was, I think 8 at the time he did that. He's 18 now, but it's been a while ago, and I've written the book, and it's been edited, but it's not been published yet. Of course, my grandson's question for me is, do I get a share of the royalties? I said, well, we'll see how well
it's very versatile of him.
Yeah.
So, did your son follow the writing procedure at all, the writing path, or was it mainly your grandson, or your grandson just did that one off?
That was the only time he really did that. And like I said, it was just the very, very basic plot of the story. And of course I added, the book ended up being like 100,000 words long. But in fact, what I did with it to develop it is, I was writing a blog at the time, and I wrote a chapter a week in my blog and posted it on the blog for it, and it went 62 weeks getting that done.
Okay, well, tell everybody your blog, and thank you very much for doing this interview, but let us know how we can find you, how we can see your latest projects, and how we can view your blog.
Okay. I have my Facebook page is facebook.com/Jack LaFountain author. That's my page. I do have an Amazon Central author page. You can find me there. I'm on Goodreads. Just search my name. My website is jacklafountainauthor.com. And my books are on there. Or you can go to houseofhonor.com, or the publishing company's website. All my books are on there. And the audiobooks as well. That's the easiest way to find me. House of Honor has probably more about the books, strangely enough, than my website does, but they're all on my website though. and links to, links to them, a bit of a description. And my blog is also on the website. I actually write two. One's called No Jack, and the other one is called The Lost Crusader. The Lost Crusader one is more of a faith-based writing. The No Jack one is just whatever I happen to be thinking that day. I sit down to write. I talked with some writers about writer's block, and I said, "Well, I've written more than one blog about having nothing to write about." From the start of the blog, I'm sitting here looking at the cursor, and and I can't think of anything to write, and just once you start, you get into it.
Okay, awesome. Do you have anything else you want to give a shout out to, or anything that people should take a look at? Anything that inspired you that you want to point towards?
The things that it kind of inspired me are those old school things. I think those movies are still great. I noticed on some of the channels, you can still find the Twilight Zone, the Outer Limits, all of those things on there. But
The original black and white ones. Like I know they tried to redo them in color. To me, it didn't capture the same magic. I don't know about you.
The most amazing one I've found that I watched when I was growing up, and it's called One Step Beyond, and it's sort of Twilight Zone like, or Outer Limits like, but all the stories are based on actual accounts. So they're sort of true Twilight Zone stories.
Okay.
And it is an amazing series. And I heard that I told you wrong. It's houseofhonorbooks.com rather than houseofhonor.com.
Okay. All right. No problem. Well, thank you very much for doing this interview.
All right. Appreciate it. I like the podcast. I've listened to several episodes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we'll do our best to let everybody know to listen in.
Okay, awesome.
And enjoy it very much.